right, good afternoon and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the events manager here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to welcome all the NCIA members to the third edition of our now members-only Policy Council Conversation Series today. If you're just joining us, please be aware we'll be conducting Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation, so please post any questions to the board by pressing the Q&A button that you'll see available along the bottom toolbar within the Zoom platform. Stop on into that Q&A area throughout the session, even if you don't have anything to contribute personally. Review the submissions, and if any catch your eye as contributing to the conversation, give them an upvote to send them to the top of the feed. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get this show on the road. As you may know, NCIA's Policy Council and State Regulations Committee just wrapped up a blog series and white paper around interstate commerce, and we're thrilled to be joined by one of the authors of those publications, along with a number of industry experts leading the charge to advance efforts for interstate commerce across the country. Our Deputy Director of Public Policy, Rachel Kurtz-McElwain, will be leading them in a discussion on how allowing interstate commerce will be better for the environment, plus patients and consumers, while both undercutting the illicit market and boosting an industry that struggles to survive within the confines of state borders. Thank you to all our NCIA members for joining us this afternoon. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled Policy Council Conversations, Interstate Commerce, Environmental, Economic, and Social Equity Implications. You've got the room, Rachel. Take it away.
Okay. Yeah, if everyone wants to turn on their cameras, see your lovely faces. And yeah, as Brian said, I am Rachel Kurtz-McElwain. I've been in cannabis policy for about 20 years and as an attorney representing clients in the licensing process in Washington State, but most recently I've been the Deputy Director of Public Policy for NCIA, and this issue is very near and dear to my heart, and I've been working with some really great people on a blog series. We're actually still in we still have some of the series left in the white paper out, and one of our panelists here, Gabe Cross, is leading the effort on that and has done a lot of the work on that. But I'd like to first have all the panelists introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, starting with Shanita Penny.
Hi, everybody. Shanita Penny, founder of Budding Solutions, immediate past president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. I represent and work with small businesses as well as some of the MSOs in this amazing space. Also an advocate for all things legalization done right. I'm excited to be here today and really excited to talk about interstate commerce as I am hanging out here on the East Coast. I have never, ever in my life realized just how important it is for us to have interstate commerce for this industry and the community.
Thanks, Shanita. Gabe Cross.
I'm Gabe Cross. I'm the founder and CEO of Odyssey Distribution. We are a distributor, wholesaler, and brand house out on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. We've been in operations for 3 years and just over 3 years now, and we're seeing a lot of rapid growth. It's very exciting times for us right now because unfortunately we're going through a global pandemic, and for whatever reason that means everyone is smoking a lot more weed. So we've seen a lot of rapid growth. We've been excited to be able to take care of that while trying to implement policies and procedures to remain responsible operating at this time, during this very strange time. Yeah, and as mentioned, I got involved with the NCIA specifically to try and join the conversation about the NCIA's position on interstate trade because it's a very important issue to me. Oregon has always been a net exporter of cannabis, and as soon as we're allowed to, the legal industry is also going to be a massive net exporter of world-class cannabis, and we're very excited to represent Oregon to the rest of the world as soon as we can.
Thanks, Gabe, and Ben, thanks so much for all your work on the series on this issue and white paper. And now, Adam Smith, the man who's really been leading this charge nationally. Adam?
Hi, Rachel. Thank you, and thanks to NCAA for hosting this. It's great to be here. So I was the founder and director of the Craft Cannabis Alliance. Right now, I am the founder and director of the Alliance for Sensible Markets. We are about to launch an industry-facing campaign to push toward the next phase of interstate commerce. The idea being that we can get this done by 2021, and I'll talk a little bit about that campaign and what we're seeking to do. But just to reiterate what Gabe said and what Shanita said, the opportunity to normalize this market, the economics of this market, and create a boom instead of a struggle in the midst of a historic recession is interesting and exciting. And I think that the politics have lined up to help us make this happen. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Great. And we'll start with you, Adam, as far as, kind of give us some background of why you got so passionate and decided to make this your focus in life, and kind of what kind of boosted it, got it going in Oregon.
Sure. So this started, when Oregon legalized cannabis, we did something that was, I think, very smart, and also very Oregonian, which is we legalized the industry that we had, right? We understood that there was, that cannabis had been an economic driver in some of the poorest and rural and agricultural parts of the state. And rather than try to tear that out of the ground, which Prohibition had been unsuccessful in doing for generations, we made licenses cheap and unlimited. And the state actually ran a marketing campaign called Go Legal. And shockingly, the campaign was not come here with your public Canadian money and buy out a bunch of farms. It was, we know you're producing, whether you're a registered medical grower or unlicensed or unregistered. And, we want to make it easy for you to get into the legal industry. And thousands of people did that. But what we didn't think through entirely when we legalized the industry we had here in Oregon is the industry we had here was an export industry and had always been an export industry. And the minute that we hemmed all of that amazing, incredible production of world-class cannabis into a state of 4 million people, where, by the way, some not insignificant percentage of those folks get their weed for free or grow it themselves, we realized that, suddenly we had a ton of extra cannabis. Prices plunged, folks started going out of business left and right. And it became clear that until we, that what we had actually was not an oversupply problem, which had been talked about a lot publicly, but a market access problem. And if we could access the markets that we normally access, we would need every ounce of cannabis we could produce under current licensure, and we would need to expand. And so facing an economic crisis, particularly in Southern Oregon, where we were looking at about $1 billion to $1.5 billion of local capital that was being wiped out or in process of being wiped out, it became clear that we needed to normalize the economics. So in late 2018, we started talking about an interstate commerce bill in Oregon. There had been a bill in 2017, very limited, Senator Floyd Przansky had introduced. And so we took that bill, upgraded it, or updated it to allow interstate commerce between any two legal markets under interstate agreement, regardless of whether they were contiguous states or not. And the bill had a federal trigger. It said that Oregon could enter these agreements as soon as the federal government either gave permission via statute or indicated tolerance via Department of Justice memo or policy statement for this kind of commerce. Oregon could begin doing that. And then we went into California and started organizing folks there. And California's got different problems. They have a lack of shelf space due to licensing issues. And because of that, their tax rate has been devastating for the legal market. When most of the retailers that do exist are still not licensed and not paying that tax. And so it became clear in the producer states that opening up interstate markets was vital. So now we stand where I'm going to talk about the politics a little later. So we passed the bill in Oregon with the governor's approval. And we had a bill ready to go in California, and then COVID hit. And we've rearranged our ask a little bit, but we think that the path is opened to go forward. And I won't go on too long. I'll wait for the second time around, and we can talk about what we're going to do from here forward. But I think we're in a really good spot to make this happen by 2021.
Yeah, and also, you know, feel free, everybody, to jump in if you have thoughts. But I'd like Gabe, I know he worked on some of the blog series that we've put out, and about kind of diving into the economics of it and why, you know, because I know there's a lot of hesitation out there about interstate commerce, because people are afraid, you know, they are very, you know, people want to be local, you know, and have it done there. But, you know, talk about, Gabe, kind of the realities of that. And when you have kind of states that don't have the same, you know, major market that a state like Oregon or California does.
Yeah, absolutely. So economics can be a very academic topic, and so I like to always try to frame it in terms of how it affects real people. And that's what I tried to do in the blog series as well. You know, the reality is that, as Adam pointed out, we don't have an oversupply problem in Oregon, not really. We have a market access problem. There's too much weed for Oregon consumers to consume it all, right? However, as I like to say on these panels, you know, if we could trade with just California, I think Los Angeles could smoke all of Oregon's weed in a month. And, you know, I say that because there's literally 14 million people in the Los Angeles metro area, and there's 4 million people in the entire state of Oregon. And so what you have is regulations that have created these artificial boundaries and made these individual islands. And that doesn't exist in any other industry anywhere in the world. It doesn't make sense in any way except from the perspective of federal DEA agents and DOJ agents. But what this does is, so this artificial oversupply that Oregon had for the first several years of its operation effectively created an environment in which there was so much downward price pressure that literally hundreds of small farmers couldn't make a profit on their crop, could not even get the money back that they put into growing it and trimming it and drying it and curing it, because it is a very labor intensive process. And what that means is that all of these small farmers who raised money to buy a license, prepare some land and plant cannabis in it, and all the security equipment that is required by the OLCC, all of that money that was usually taken from friends and family investments just evaporates when they eventually have to shut their doors, sell their license, and move on. So what you get, the net result, is that what are already some of the most economically disadvantaged communities within Oregon, in the rural parts of the state where cannabis grows so well, is a devastation of local capital. And then there are all these distressed and abandoned assets that larger corporations from out of state can come in and pick up for pennies on the dollar. And that led immediately to this massive market consolidation here. And then that harms consumers in the long run, because once there are only a handful of players offering a more limited array of products, prices start to creep back up as you end up with kind of a smaller group of people who are only competing with each other, and not this kind of very widespread but general market competition. And the net result is that everybody in the industry is hurt from top to bottom. The other big thing that we like to talk about when we talk about the main economic impacts of the artificial ban on interstate trade is the fact that in net importer states, you know, I spend a lot of time talking about export states because I live in one. In net import states, states that have historically imported cannabis, you have this massively perverse incentive for where investors want to put their money. Because if you're not allowed to import cannabis from somewhere that it grows really well, then you're going to end up thinking that it's a really good idea to invest billions of dollars in energy and water intensive indoor grows in states like New York. And if you have to complete the entire supply chain within that state, you have a massive population within the state of New York. If you have to recreate the entire supply chain, you're going to need to invest literally billions of dollars in these indoor grow facilities. And then when the interstate trade is eventually allowed, whether that's through outright descheduling or some more incremental approach, suddenly all of those indoor facilities are going to have to compete on cost with Northern California grow operations, massive outdoor Northern California grow operations that have a tiny fraction of the inputs. And so then, you know, it becomes this issue of like, do I have even enough time to get my return on investment before I have to cut my prices to a quarter of what I was getting originally? And if you can plan for interstate trade and really push for it, you end up with an opportunity where you can say, instead of investing in the indoor grow facility, why don't I invest in a processing facility? Why don't I invest in an edibles company here in New York that makes products that might be harder to ship across the state? I can source my biomass from Northern California and Southern Oregon where they grow it cheap, and then just end up with a finished good that is easier to manage within a local supply chain. And so those are the two main issues. It's the small business and damage to small businesses and patients and consumers on the one hand, but then also the distorted incentives for investors on the other hand. I think that's enough for now.
Well, yeah, and Shanita, you're on the East Coast, so maybe you can talk about what it's like out there and what it would mean for if you were able to have interstate commerce and import it out there, and some of the ideas about, you know, some social equity ideas about how, you know, where we could give those licenses and some of the opportunities there.
You know, I think speaking to both Adam and Gabe's point, there have been the millions and millions of dollars already invested into cultivation facilities on the East Coast, specifically for the medical markets. And those medical markets have never reached, you know, the points of maturation that any of the investors hoped they would. And that's been because of overregulation. That's because of, you know, poor education and marketing, not allowing patients to, you know, really go into a doctor's office and just talk about symptoms, having these really, you know, specific list of qualifying conditions. So, you know, we've created such a monster of a medical industry here on the East Coast that we've got to address that first. Folks aren't going to address it in the appropriate way now, though, because a bunch of money's involved. And so when you start to think about how you can better utilize those facilities that exist, the monies, they haven't seen the returns yet. You know, we can start thinking about processing. We can start thinking about, you know, those really specific things or strains that are going to grow on the West Coast that we can then bring here. We're going to have, you know, and it's happening right now in North Carolina, and I'm not talking cannabis, I'm talking hemp, where you've got farmers that were able to transition their existing farms to grow hemp, but there are no processors, and they're sitting on a harvest and can't, you know, again, make any money. This doesn't get to patients and consumers. So we have to start thinking about this in a way that makes sense for everybody who's invested at this point, including the communities, because a lot of these indoor cultivation operations were put in places where if they're polluting and damaging the environment, these are the people that no one's advocating for anyway. So we can start to think about social equity in a way that's not just, hey, throw the licenses at folks, but really start to think about creating real opportunities. If we're going to talk about social equity and interstate commerce, this is a conversation about economic empowerment. This is a conversation about a licensee on the East Coast finally having some kind of advantage over these MSOs and these larger players. Because if it isn't interstate commerce, I don't see a real pathway to success for our small businesses, our social equity businesses with the things that are happening now. And so, yes, the idea around better utilizing our supply chain, you know, growing it efficiently, transporting it efficiently, and then providing a reasonably priced product to consumers. Right now, the East Coast patients, they're paying so much for medicine. And if we just started to look at something like interstate commerce, we could absolutely bring the cost down. And when we start to do that, then we see patients actually signing up and participating. We see tax revenue because we are what? Seeing patients buy from the regulated market as opposed to the legacy market. And we have to create a real appeal, a really appealing entryway for the legacy market, or they will continue to beat the pants off of us.
Yeah, and you made a good point too when it comes to patients and even eventually consumers in general when it becomes legal, and the price. And when you do have, say, on the East Coast, these limited, there's only so many giant buildings growing indoor to supply people that the price is so high, which is, maybe good for the industry or good for that company, but even then they're not getting their money back. But the patients and consumers, it prices them out, especially patients who are already on limited budgets. And so that's another thing. If we had a true market where we could get, a lot cheaper raw product, it really would benefit patients more and provide them more access to more diverse strains and diverse products too, because now you also have they're stuck with what is getting grown and not and maybe there's a certain strain that with terpene profile and everything that might be good for them, but it only exists in another state. Nobody's growing it where they live. So that issue comes up too. But Adam, you want to talk about, kind of where we're heading now?
Yeah, well, I first want to touch on, some of what Shanita said about social equity. Siloed markets create barriers to equity, right? We're looking at, let's say there's a state like New Jersey. They have 12 medical growers, right? And the minute that New Jersey goes legal, which will likely happen on November 3rd, those medical growers will be able to switch over immediately into the rec market. So whoever ends up getting licenses behind them, you have 12 very large companies that are going to immediately invest tens of millions of dollars in production in that state because they are walking into a siloed industry where they'll face no competition from anyone who can grow it cheaper. Almost inevitably, those large companies are going to dominate the market. In Illinois, 6 months in, I know they're waiting for licensing to happen, and those other licenses to be given out. But 6 months in, 80% of the cannabis is being grown by 6 companies, right? And everybody who walks into that industry is walking into that reality, right? If a state like New York or New Jersey legalized, with looking forward at interstate commerce as a way that their market is going to function, you disincentivize the investment of 10 or 20 or $50 million in large scale indoor production in a place like New York, New Jersey. And that's production that, as Gabe pointed out, will ultimately be non-competitive when federal legalization happens. But since it's the only way in a siloed market to put product on shelves, you're going to get huge investment in that. It's going to make it very difficult for small producers there, but more than that, it's going to make all of the other parts of the industry that have lower barriers to entry, and particularly retail distribution and delivery, dependent at some level on those large companies. If you're going to buy biomass for manufacturing, you're going to end up buying it from those large companies. They're going to set the entire market. If we legalize looking forward at interstate commerce, suddenly the power is in the hands of the buyers, right? So you're talking about retail distribution, delivery. These are areas of the trade that have much lower barriers to entry. It's much easier to control license flow into those levels of the trade. And so, you still need to win the fight at the state level of what their equity program looks like, right? And I would say we would want to give, 80% of retail distribution delivery licenses in a state like New York with such a long history of racial discrimination in enforcement into minority businesses or into equity businesses. And if you do that at those levels of the trade, that's where you locate the center of economic power. And there is no guarantee that the state does the right thing with their licensing and their equity program, but that's a fight you have to win anyway, whether it's a siloed state or a non-siloed state. But this will open up a pathway for actual success for levels of the trade that don't require enormous capital investments. And so I think that that's the, to me, that is the advantage. And I also think, we are working with MCBA. It's not, officially yet. They're going to have their board meeting next week, and I'm excited. I've been working with them, and I'm looking forward to having them as a partner in this campaign. And I think that we have a moment to bring a transformation of the cannabis industry to normalize the economics, with the argument that we can do this in a way that is going to support equity. And, in states like New York and New Jersey, where legislators of color have already, in New York, turned down the governor's bill last year because there wasn't a good path to equity, given the increased attention that equity has and the economics around this has, this is the right moment, I think, to go in and attack the whole thing, restructure the industry in a way that's going to provide a pathway. And yes, we have further wins at the state level that have to happen, but those are fights that are being, waged pretty hard right now. And so we think this gives those efforts an advantage. Sorry, I know I didn't answer your question at all. I talked about something totally different. Thanks.
No, but Adam, to your point, I think at this particular point in history, we've seen what's happened in each of the markets that has attempted to create some social equity through licensing cannabis businesses. What we have not seen are wraparound services that are, resourced properly and funded is what I mean. What we haven't seen are real niche, a niche in the market that says, this is how we are going to allow you to thrive. So what we have here now are the small farmers, the legacy farmers in the best region in the world, right? Because if I right now want a Black cannabis cultivator, they're certainly not in an East Coast medical market. They are in California, they are in Oregon, they are in Washington. If we don't connect the folks who have, without a social equity program, been able to get into this industry and cultivate cannabis, and then connect them with those legacy distributors and retailers, then we don't have a path for social equity through interstate commerce. And it will take, these states in, lieu of some federal movement, the states to acknowledge that this has to happen. Virginia is approaching adult use legalization, and they are saying we are social equity and social justice first. I am born and raised in Virginia, so I know all too well just what a state like Virginia means when they say that. They have a long history. We can go back to the ACLU and verify this, but they have a long history of over-policing, of over-sentencing. I myself had a cannabis charge in Virginia, so I know the path that it takes to even get that off your record, to just live a normal life, not even get into the industry. What we have in Virginia is an opportunity to test this out. We keep looking at New York and New Jersey, but I can tell you that there is a corridor of 95 that was specifically set up to target drug traffickers. Those California shipments, once they hit New York, come down the coast. We need to connect with, from day one, this isn't give the 5 and 6 medical operators in Virginia a chance. No, we need to connect day one and have folks, day one of legalization, retailing, processing, and if they want to, also cultivating, if we're talking social equity. But the only way you even give these folks a chance in hell is if there is some niche, and the only competitive force right now that they could possibly have would be this amazing cannabis grown efficiently, which allows them to then retail it for a profit, which no vertically integrated cannabis operation is doing.
Yeah, I think that's great, Ncia. And also to Mark's point in the chat, I think that the two efforts have to be hand in hand. We have to demand social equity as we're making these interstate agreements. And there's been a lot of chat about how is it too soon to do this. I think right now it's definitely too soon to just turn on interstate trade. But there has to be a process, because it's going to take a lot of work. There's a lot of things that need to be put in place. And part of that is forcing the conversation about social equity and putting it meaningfully into statute, into code, in a way that it can't just be stripped away or tap danced around. as we go state by state, trying to get governors on board, trying to get legislatures on board for moving towards a limited interstate trade model. And we really want to, I mean, I'm bleeding into the last part of the conversation here, but the concept is not like, let's just take all the regulations away and open the floodgates and then say, okay, the FDA is going to come in and write brand new regulations, whole cloth. No, what we want to do is move slow, one step at a time, and be very thoughtful about how we do this, because we want the eventual federal regulations that are going to govern cannabis distribution and manufacturing and growing. We want that to bubble up from what's working in the states and not be written in a top-down way, you know, just where people who have been doing nothing but regulating against cannabis are suddenly writing the rules for how we can grow it and how we can distribute it.
Yeah, and I'd like your thoughts on, you know, Shanita was talking about the legacy, you know, importers and distributors on the East Coast, and how do we engage them to be part of this conversation and show them, like, this is something that could happen and be really, you know, when we move into, you know, the legal markets and connecting them with the legacy growers on the West Coast that they may already know if they're already distributing on the East Coast, but, you know, really with maybe the licensed legacy growers and the, you know, how do we kind of pull them in and engage them? And I know some of them are probably already chomping at the bit to get into a legal market once it's there. But I think because that's sort of the idea here is, like, let's, you know, work with the ones who are already doing it. But, you know, and like what Oregon did, because Oregon had a great idea. I mean, it was a great idea to be like, hey, we have, you know, growers here. You know, we acknowledge you exist. Let's just get you legal, you know. And if but, you know, unfortunately, like you said, small state. But, you know, what are some ideas for, like, making sure those connections are made so that it is, you know, we are prioritizing them as the people who are the ones getting the licenses.
Can I grab that for a second? So two things, and Gabe mentioned something. I'm going to answer your question. Gabe mentioned something about that this has to happen hand in hand, and he's 100% right. New York and New Jersey, and I use those two states. I'm from New York. Arizona is probably going to legalize. Virginia's walking toward legalization. We're talking about a lot of states, but I will use New York and New Jersey because they are almost certain to legalize this coming year. How they legalize is going to determine how effective we're going to be able to be to put social equity in place in those industries. And so if we allow states like New York and New Jersey to legalize under a siloed system, saying that, no, first we have to wait to, you know, to figure out all the social equity components before we move forward on opening the system, they're going to give out licenses in a siloed system, which means you're going to have 6 or 8 or maybe 10 large companies investing tens of millions, probably $1 billion in those two states in production. Once they do that, it gets very hard, as we've seen in all the other states, to then band-aid on social equity after the pie has been divided up, right? We need to walk in and saying, this is a, you know, we need to get the economics right so your industry can boom within that. And here's how we channel that torrent of economic success into equity. And it needs to be all one thing, because if you start with legalizing in those states and you set up the economics wrong, you're in a very difficult political position to try to claw back from those companies the market that we just handed them, right? And so there is no guarantees, right? There's no guarantee that the next state is going to do this right. But again, we're in a moment where there's going to be a lot of attention on it, right? And so if we can do that in the Northeast and show how we can get those industries up and running in 6 to 18 months versus 3 to 5 to God knows how many years, and that we can empower small companies to immediately have world-class product filling their shelves, right? That, I think, that becomes a platform that we can then stand on to help create equity. But Gabe's right; it has to happen all at once. The other thing is that if you empower the retail distribution delivery side, which has always been, like, New York has had a cannabis industry, a functioning cannabis industry for generations. It's an import industry, right? And the locus of power in that industry has been in retail distribution delivery, right? In New York City, 430,000 people were arrested in a 20-year period for cannabis, just in New York City, where I grew up, right? Out of those 430,000 people, 86% were Black and Latino. How many do you think were busted for growing weed? Almost none. right? They were in retail, distribution, delivery, possession, right? And so that is where the economic center of those industries are. And that is what we feed into. And if we can use this to show, look, if we give out licensing in an equitable way, and those are the folks who are deciding what to buy and bring into the state to sell to consumers, you are also creating a very fertile ground for minority producers, because you will have the folks who are going to be buying the product are also minority, or also equity businesses. And we can create those channels to support equity producers through through who is buying the product and what product is being sold in a state like New York. Sorry, I'm done.
I don't know. I was wondering if Shanita had any thoughts on that.
The only thing I was going to add to that is, again, I think we throw social equity around very, very loosely. If we are talking about economic empowerment through this social equity licensing, then it does not empower me to retail a product that it doesn't empower me or my community to retail this product that was manufactured by this larger company that is not interested in any way in further developing me as a company or giving back to my community. And so I say, unless there is a supply chain within the existing ecosystem, like what's being developed in California, where you have distributors and retailers that are dedicated to uplifting and empowering these social equity businesses and suppliers, then it doesn't work. Social equity success in New York, to me, does not mean somebody who looks like me retailing one of the MSO's products. If they choose to make that a part of their product mix, by all means do it. But until you tell me that, there's a social equity business or a diverse business, interstate commerce, before we talk about social equity, is probably going to address diversity in the industry before it really addresses social equity. Before we start to talk about it bringing up people that have been impacted, it will probably just create a little bit more diversity. And I think that we need to also start to recalibrate our expectations and what we're working towards, because I do think it's amazing that we have the diverse cultivators that we have, especially in Humboldt and in other places. And so if we can connect them with other places in the market, then we start to talk about diversifying this industry and truly competing. Because what I'd like to see is, more of that support. Right now, when you have someone applying for a competitive license on the East Coast, they go out and they pick a few Black and brown and women and veterans, and they build this team. And then when it's go time, these people are nowhere to be found. This expertise is nowhere to be found. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in, with poor performing companies that have blown through millions and millions of dollars that many people with much less would have been able to have seen more success with.
Yeah, 100%. And there was another webinar about the whole predatory partnerships issue, around these equity licenses that, really end up not, in kind of in the wrong hands, and through some pretty shady partnership agreements with people who don't fully understand, kind of what they're signing. And so if people want to find that, that's another webinar that happened. I think it already happened. I don't know. And we have so many great webinars. But Adam, why don't you kind of go through what your campaign is now, and how this is we're going to achieve interstate commerce.
Excellent. So first of all, I'm glad we spent some real time talking about equity, because it's such a vital issue within the issue of interstate commerce, but within the industry. And it needs to be addressed, especially as these large consumer markets that have such a terrible history of discriminatory policing come online. But I want to also touch on the broader economics for the industry. we're heading into a recession, a jobs crisis. We're in one, right? And right now the cannabis industry has been struggling in almost all parts of the country. But with this small change, and we are, the campaign is really looking for the governors to help us take the lead to make this happen. With this one policy change, if we could start moving product from where it is normally produced to where there's greatest demand, which is why markets exist in the first place, immediately two things would happen. In the producer states, you would immediately see just about every business, producer, manufacturer, processor, grower, you will see their valuations increase by multiples. 2x to 5x has been estimated just instantly, which will bring a wave of investment, expansion, and hiring in the middle of a recession. On the East Coast, if the next legalizing state says, yes, we're going to start with an interstate model, those industries will get off the ground in like I said, 6 to 18 months. You'll have a wave of investment come in. We won't be waiting 5 and 6 years for them to figure out how to grow 1 million square feet under lights in Albany, right? And you will have thousands of businesses formed, investment, and tens of thousands of jobs in the middle of a recession. And so that's the basis that we are approaching the governors on. We want to be the governor's partners in economic recovery, right? And so, and there probably isn't an industry in the country, in the private sector, that can, with one small change, without a government bailout or handout, see an explosive boom happen in profitability and scope, right? With just this small policy change, I think we are probably the best positioned industry in the private sector in the United States to provide that. So we are asking the governors, and we are focusing on governors of legal and about to legalize states, to enter into or to agree to an interstate compact that would regulate the transfer of products between those states. And that would mean testing, labeling, and tracking, essentially, are the three things. And it's not that difficult. It's not, negotiating peace at Malta or anything. We need to come up, we need to figure out whose testing requirements states will accept, what they need on their labels. But I know with 1,000 companies on the West Coast will put anything you want on the label if they can sell it in New York, right? This is not rocket science. And so we are asking the governors to agree to an interstate compact, and we are working with partners to put together a model compact by the middle of December, and we are asking them to present that to Congress in 2021 for their up or down vote. And that could be attached to an appropriations bill. There are several ways it could be done, but we're pretty confident, even if the Republicans hold the Senate, there is enough states' rights and free trade sentiment on the Republican side that we could get something like this through. We're not asking for, full legalization through that. But of course, if the Democrats take over the Senate, we think that this would sail through. And the thing to keep in mind is that right now, Joe Biden has made very clear that he's not interested in legalizing cannabis. And I come from the movement side of this, and I was fighting Joe Biden on the crime bill in 1993 and 1994. So I know who he is. He is not a friend of cannabis, but he has gotten to the point where he said, look, I'm not comfortable with legalization, but I want the states to take the lead, and that's okay. The Democratic platform that just came out backed him up on that. It did not call for legalization, right? It called for the states to take the lead. And in 2021, Congress is going to be facing multiple crises. And if the Democrats take over the Senate, multiple investigations, there's going to be very little oxygen in the room, and a president who doesn't want it. We are unlikely to see cannabis legalization in 2021, which is why we adopted the hashtag states can't wait, right? And we cannot wait to normalize this industry. We cannot watch all these companies suffer when they could be expanding and booming. And so that is our mission. We're going to launch it next week publicly toward the industry. Obviously, the political work has been going on for 2 years. We feel pretty confident about where we are with the governor's offices in Oregon and California. They understand this issue. We are starting to make inroads on the producer state, some of the producer states, and we are going to ask the governors to make this agreement, set up the regulations, and to Gabe's point, having the states that have an interest in the success of the industry set up the regulations is far superior to just waiting around for the federal government to come in cold and start to regulate. We think we can set up a regulatory regime that the feds will be able to largely adopt. So we think that it works for the industry on multiple levels.
Yeah, well, and a reminder that the future Madam Vice President what is the primary sponsor of the MORE Act. So, hopefully she will have Biden's ear too, and maybe can. And I know that there is a lot of effort in the industry to talk to Biden, and you know, fundraisers, stuff like things that get their ear. So it's not impossible, but it is, you know, it's not going to happen probably right away. And if we can, you know, start that, like Biden said, you know, have the states do it, and the states are starting to show we can do this, then I think that will help move it down. And you said too, if two states do end up forming a compact, it will force Congress's hand to do something about that.
I mean, I think Biden will ultimately be the guy who legalizes cannabis. I'm just not ready to bank the whole industry's future on the fact that it's going to happen in year one, and we need to get the industry actually running. Sorry.
Well, and if the right two states form a compact, then we have additional states that have to get with it, right? If you're talking New York, New Jersey, then you're talking Pennsylvania, Connecticut as well. And I think that we're going to start to see more of that movement happen regionally. Again, I don't think New York and New Jersey either or go into having an Interstate Commerce Pact and not think about the places, every single market down 95 to Florida. The opportunity is there.
Yeah, we've already seen some of the
are there. We can do this.
Yes, and we've already seen like Northeast states, you know, working together around, you know, trying to have, you know, regulations that work, and it's just a matter of being able to actually go across the state line. And also, I know a lot of the West Coast regulators, the states, are joining together to start trying to make more kind of uniform regulations. So they're kind of, you know, there is a movement among regulators to really, I think, want to see more uniformity that would and make it easier. What were you going to say, Shani?
I was going to say, I mean, just in reacting to the pandemic, states and municipalities are looking at, you know, tax dollars going across the border, and they're looking at that from every angle. And so they're also going to have to consider that as they look at regulating for new tax revenue in that same way. So I'm excited about it, that it is happening in these clusters, if you will, as opposed to the silos with the hard borders that we used to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of quick points. I think it's also going to be critical, even if we don't see wholesale legalization. There are some bills that we need to push really hard on, like the Safe Banking Act, because as scary as it is now to handle massive amounts of cash, I mean, we've had a absolute terror of break-ins here in Portland over the last month and a half or so. The thought of moving hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash across the country is terrifying to me. So if we can't have access to banking, it's just going to create a bigger target on the back of the cannabis industry. And another point, somebody mentioned kind of a technical point, but what about states in between California and New York that don't allow cannabis? How are we going to get it through there? And the short answer is there's a couple of ways that we could look at doing it. For example, using federally regulated supply chain only, putting it on trains and planes, and not actually driving it in trucks through the in-between states. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, answering the question in the chat.
Every industry that has to think about state by state regulations finds a workaround. I mean, in the spirits and beer industry, I can remember the days of literally having a truck bump the dock of a facility that we own to make, you know, to be compliant in that state. Again, this commodity has been moving from coast to coast all of my life and for much longer than that. So I think that there are plenty of professionals and folks that can do this and do it right. And we may even save some of these entities, and I'll just keep throwing Amtrak out there.
Yeah, those are, I mean, that's a federal line. And so that is, I think, how we've been talking about how we would move it. And I think if the panelists want to look at the Q&As, and some of them are kind of long for me to read out, but if you wanted to, I mean, well, I'll just ask the first one. Since each state is out to protect itself, how does a federal approval solve the interstate commerce issue?
Wait, can you read that? Can you read that again, Rachel? Sorry, I was trying to find the Q&A.
Oh, since each state is out to protect itself, how does a federal approval solve the commerce issue?
I think that's a great question, and I think that a big part of it is about pairing states that have problems who can become each other's solutions, like New York, if they come online, or any state that has already approved medical or adult use cannabis that is having issues with getting enough supply onto their shelves. Pairing that with a state like Oregon that has more cannabis than we can consume here. And somebody mentioned earlier that Oregon doesn't seem to have an oversupply problem anymore. Well, one of the major reasons for that is that a ton of producers are stockpiling oil. They're taking all the trim and flour and they're squishing it through BHO machines. And now the current inventory of cannabis, which the OLCC reports frequently, flour is going down, but oil is going up. So we still have an oversupply issue. We've just found a storage solution for it. So matching these states that have opposite problems that become each other's solution, that is how we get towards this interstate compact. And a federal trigger is absolutely critical because we don't want to do something that invites the DEA to come kick down our doors. So that's kind of how I see that. I don't know, Adam, if you have anything to add to that. But.
Yeah, well, so the compact, if two states agree to a compact and the federal government allows it, right? So that is now giving permission for those states to regulate that commerce, right? But in signing that compact, they would then be bound by those states, that the signatory states would be bound by the Commerce Clause, and specifically saying that they will not be able to discriminate against the products of other states, right? Under the Constitution, you can't do that. Florida cannot keep California from sending its oranges there, right? You're not allowed to disadvantage other states, and that's part of what the Commerce Clause is meant to do. So an interstate compact takes the law enforcement question out of the hands of the DEA. It approves that commerce, but then those states would be liable to operate under Commerce Clause restrictions, meaning that they, if they're going to trade, they need to trade fairly, which is what the Commerce Clause does. And as Gabe alluded to, in travel, if the feds are allowing this to happen, we can put stuff on trains or planes, and that's federally regulated.
Can you guys see your Q&A? I want you to, Mark has some long ones. Well, here's how can a intergovernment agreement guarantee social equity opportunities for people of color without using them as cannon fodder in an unproven violation of federal law? Well, I guess you kind of answered, Adam, that it would, it really becomes where the, we would need a nod, a federal nod of approval.
We can't do this. We can't do this with the Fed saying yes. Yeah. Otherwise, everybody's cannon fodder.
I was going to say, we also can't depend on our government or any agencies for this. I think that it is imperative that we have industry and organizations step up because we do have the issue that was just mentioned, things like safe banking. Until we address access to things like that, and let's be real, even access to banking doesn't mean that minorities and poor people are going to have better access. If they can't get home loans right now or access to banking for any other reason, I'm sure cannabis isn't going to make it easier. What we have to do is start to look at this like other forms of government contracting and put mechanisms in place to hold accountable industry partners that come in and commit to doing part of this work and then don't do it, which we've seen in the medical space, especially on the East Coast. What we have to do is make sure that folks who are coming in and purporting to do some of the heavy lifting on this, that then leave social equity licensees out to dry and often in worse positions than they were in, that they're held accountable for that, held accountable by our industry and as consumers, but then also held accountable by some regulatory mechanism.
Yeah, and Mark, no, they are great questions. I was just teasing you, but and really, we're kind of running out of the hour here, but I know that we're gonna do a blog post. We haven't done a blog post yet on interstate commerce and social equity, and so that's why I wanted to connect you and Adam so that our DEI committee can really kind of grapple with it and get all of their concerns out there and put them on the table and make sure that it will be we will try to address it as much as possible and make sure that social equity does remain the priority in all of this. So look forward to you guys coming out with a great blog post on that. But as we end now, I want if everybody has a final thought that they want to impart before we close. We'll start with Shanita.
Just everybody remember to vote. Mid-October is the deadline. Just in case you're mailing it in, we want to make sure that it reaches its destination in time. I am excited that we finally have a VP pick. It allows us to focus on what needs to be focused on, which is making sure that we get the current person in office out.
Yes, 100%. Gabe, final thought?
I actually would like to use my final thought to answer this last second question in the chat that's about current East Coast operators rejecting the prospect of interstate commerce out of hand as not being in the interest of existing state operators. I think that to say that interstate trade is bad for you, so you're just going to ignore it, I think that that's a mistake. I think that that's not looking forward to the future. And I think that interstate trade is going to be a reality because once we have any kind of federal deregulation of cannabis, then it will be unconstitutional to discriminate against states based on where the cannabis comes from. So interstate trade is inevitable. And if you're not planning for it, then you're going to be blindsided by it when it comes. So that's why I think that every single operator in every state should make their decisions based on the reality that exists right now, but plan for a future in which interstate trade is going to happen.
And that's actually a great final thought too, Gabe. But and also I wanted to make sure people know that if the questions weren't answered or if you have more, we're happy to follow up later and especially follow up with the conversation in NCIA's online community platform, NCIA Connect, where I believe Brian has already gotten a conversation going. So happy to have more of those discussions on there. So Adam, final thoughts? We can't hear you.
You're still muted, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you again, NCIA and Rachel and Brian for hosting this. And it's always great to do anything with Gabe and Shanita, who are amazing. This is a moment that we need to rethink, to really think about the economics of this industry going forward. Multiple new states are about to come online. The further we go down a road that is not economically or environmentally sustainable, the harder it's going to be to get back to an industry that's economically, environmentally sustainable. Bo Whitney, who's an economist who's done a ton of work in this field, argues that that we can expand production on the West Coast to meet East Coast needs for about 5 to 10% of the cost of creating entirely new production industries on the East Coast or in those states. That's massive. That means in a normal economic system, no one would ever invest $50 million to grow weed in Schenectady, New York. It also takes 23 times the energy, according to another Bo Whitney report, to produce indoor as outdoor, and so to grow all of our biomass under lights and temperature control is environmentally irresponsible. We started this push for interstate commerce, really looking at the legacy producers on the West Coast who are being pushed out of a market that they built and suffered for at the moment it was becoming legal, and not being able to find ways to earn a living. We expanded that to looking at legacy markets and the problems with trying to find pathways to equity in silo markets in newly legalizing states that don't have production capacity, in place, that don't grow it where it grows. And so as we reimagine this market into something that can function and something that can, make tens of thousands of people, tens of billions of dollars, we want to do that in a way that understands that is accountable to the history of prohibition and of this industry, and that helps end prohibition with integrity. And I understand that it's scary for people to step into the unknown, but it is also insane for us to move forward with an industry that will mostly collapse when federal legalization happens. And so I invite everyone who's listening, and anyone who's in or around the industry to join us in doing this. We are going to be a force for not only opening up markets, but to do that in a context of supporting legacy markets and supporting the communities that deserve to find a place and success and economic power in this industry. And I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to become part of a coalition alliance that's coming together that has those goals. And given the current political moment and social moment, I think we have a real opportunity to do this, and in the process, increase the size of this industry by multiple fold pretty quickly by normalizing the economics. We're going to be launching it out of a website at sensiblemarkets.org. It is not live yet. It will be live next week. We are going to be launching with 30 or 40 industry partners, and we're going to have some Zoom calls and stuff and answer more questions. And thanks everybody for listening. And with Shanita, let's vote these people out.
Oh, you're muted, Rachel.
Okay. I just say thank you so much to these amazing panelists. They are all just so incredible to work with on every aspect. And with that, I will give it back to Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Adam, Gabe, and Shanita. For everybody that's still here in the audience, why don't we give them a big virtual round of applause? I always love trying to replicate this in a virtual environment. If you had fun today, you got a good key takeaway, raise your hand up in the audience poll. All the panelists will see that pop up under their screen. Awesome. Perfect. Well, we really appreciate all of your all's continued participation with our online educational content. Today's session was fantastic. I always very much enjoy anytime Adam and Gabe or Shanita cover this topic at one of our in-person events. So we were super thrilled to combine all of their forces today for a really great conversation discussing the implications that interstate commerce could have across our industry. So with that, I do want to conclude today's session with our typical outro, previewing a few upcoming sessions in our Industry Essentials series and some upcoming members-only events that are available for all of you all to take advantage of. So first off, next week we have another edition of our continuing NCIA Committee Insights series, this edition being hosted by our Risk Management and Insurance Committee. This session will include a panel of experts which will examine how a recent case in Nevada calls into question the ability to enforce cannabis-related contracts in federal courts and what impact these cases may have on how cannabis deal-making gets done, as well as best practices to mitigate the risk of non-enforcement. In case you missed the update, we have transitioned our Committee Insight series into a new format, continuing to grant NCIA members virtual or exclusive complimentary access to all of our virtual events, but we're now going to be requesting all non-members who are participating in our educational content to pay a nominal fee to support the organization. That means that participating in our educational content is more valuable to you if you join NCIA as a member. So please consider joining NCIA if you are not currently an NCIA member in order to gain access to all of our continued online educational content. And then following that on August 24th, we have another session in our Committee Insight series. Are you a social equity operator or applicant seeking capital? Well, make sure to join us for this session to learn what to do to break through the many barriers which can exist throughout that process and raise the capital that you need. Khadijah Adams, chair of NCIA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and a number of special guests will walk you through the types of documents needed in preparation of raising capital, with a special focus on creative ways to do so within the cannabis space. I know this will have a lot of tie into the questions that were raised in today's topic. So I would definitely highly suggest all the NCIA members to sign up for this session as well. You can do so at NCIA's website by heading to our events calendar. You'll be directed to log into your member profile, and that is how you will claim your complimentary tickets for these and all other upcoming member-only events. And then finally, to wrap out the month, we have another edition of our ongoing monthly members-only fireside chat with NCIA's Government Relations Team program. Tune into this month's fireside chat with our Government Relations Team, Mike and Michelle, as they are joined by John Hudak of the Brookings Institute to discuss what this November will mean for the future of the cannabis industry for years to come. During this webinar, our panel of experts will examine key congressional races, review how the changing makeup of Congress may shift opinions about marijuana, and chat about what these organizations are researching and writing about next. As with today's Policy Council Conversation series, our fireside chat with Government Relations Team is a members-only exclusive session. So if you aren't currently an NCIA member, please make sure to join NCIA in advance of registering for this. And if you are an NCIA member, make sure that your membership remains active through the rest of the month so that you'll be granted exclusive access for this session as well. And last but not least, I would like to formally invite all of our members in attendance to attend the second virtual tour of our new Cannabis Caucus Cyber Series this fall. Starting again in September, over the final 3 weeks of the month, we are bringing our beloved member networking and educational event back with a focus on the Southwest, Midwest, and Northeast regions this time around. In case you missed it, earlier this summer, we took everything you love about the members-only Cannabis Caucus networking events in person and reformatted it into a one-of-a-kind virtual experience. To kick things off, you'll receive exclusive access to industry insights delivered firsthand from national and regional leaders, followed by a live Q&A session with audience members to provide the interaction you expect when participating in an NCIA event. We'll then conclude the evening with a happy half hour featuring an exclusive live musical performance broadcast directly into your living room, with plenty of curated opportunities to interact with your regional network across multiple different platforms. Throughout the event, we'll be showcasing some suggested strains alongside some incredible do-it-yourself recipes for cannabis-infused appetizers, mocktails, and cocktails, while encouraging everyone to share their experience with the creation and consumption process. Log into NCIA's Community Hub today to secure your spot, and if you have any issues during the registration process, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team at events@thecannabisindustry.org. All right. And then lastly as well, I did want to make a quick mention. We do have a number of digital marketing sponsorship opportunities that are available across our entire breadth of multiple digital marketing platforms, including our Industry Essentials webinar series. Following the Industry Essentials that I just highlighted, we do have the next 3 editions of our Service Solutions series, which is our sponsored content webinar series, allowing our members to have a platform to discuss their services, their solutions, and their businesses directly with our established network of cannabis business owners. If you're interested in sponsoring a webinar or associating your brand with any of our other digital marketing opportunities, please reach out to our team today at bizdev@thecannabisindustry.org. All right, and perfect. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Huge thank you to our panelists, audience members, and member businesses which make our work possible. Please complete the attendee survey after leaving the meeting room to gain immediate access to our presentation and exclusive 30-day access to a formatted video recording, which will be hosted, as Rachel mentioned earlier in the presentation, inside of our members-only community platform, NCIA Connect. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time for another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. We'll leave you all with this end-of-event credit sequence highlighting all of the nearly 24 member businesses that participated in this afternoon's program, featuring some audio stylings by the Noddy's Warriors, who some of you old-timers might remember as the headliners of NCIA's Cannabis Carnival, held during the inaugural Cannabis Business Summit and Expo here in Denver, Colorado in June 2014. Enjoy, and we'll see you all next week.